Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to the virtual book launch of Vibal Foundation's latest title, Philippine Cinema 1897 to 2020. I am Paul Baloha, and I'm honored to be your master of ceremonies for such a historical event this afternoon. Before we start the program, we would just like to apologize for the delay on going live. We experienced a technical difficulty that's really unavoidable. But on behalf of the writers, publisher, and the editorial team of Philippine Cinema 1897 to 2020, allow me first to thank and acknowledge the people who are joining and watching this very important and prestigious event. This event celebrates the men and women of the Philippine cinema, and so at this very hour, we are making history. It is certainly an honor that we are virtually gathered this afternoon to launch this book. Philippine Cinema 1897 to 2020 is a lavishly illustrated art book that not only provides a dazzling retrospective of over 100 years of Philippine cinema, but it also simultaneously traces its history, genres, narratives, tropes, and lore while subjecting its rich filmography to critic and film theory. The book tracks Philippine cinematic beginnings as a technological marvel and its many turns up to the 21st century as it blindly accepted, appropriated, indigenized, and even attacked Western conventions through intentionally wicked but hilarious parodies. This afternoon, one of the forefront film pundits of the present time who brought the art of motion pictures close to the Filipinos' hearts will be joining us for a short pre-recorded lecture in line with the book launch. The multi-awarded Filipino filmmaker and scholar, Professor Nick Deocampo of the University of the Philippines Film Institute, is here with us to give us important lessons about teaching film and integrating film literacy into the curriculum. A question and answer session will take place thereafter, so please prepare your questions and leave them in the comment section so we can see them and have them answered. At this point, we'd like to show you for the very first time the book trailer on the Philippine Cinema 1897 to 2020 to give you a preliminary look at what the book has to offer by explaining the concept, rationale, inspirations, and coverage of the book.
Philippine cinema in its early years was caught between the retreating Hispanic culture and the incoming Anglo-American culture that both asserted their influence over a colonized society through the new technology of cinema. Back then, no one would have foreseen how this young art form would eventually become the most popular of the arts, nor could they have predicted how two colonial cultures would intertwine with the emergent Filipino culture in an art form that seamlessly wove together the other arts, theater, music, dance, and literature.
I was invited into this project by the senior writer, Mr. Gaspar, and I was so honored, so I decided to join the team, and it went so very well. The book is encyclopedic in approach. We have included as much details as possible and check them for accuracy. Future filmmakers can make it as not only as a visual but as a factual reference of how film was developed from the earliest time to the present, so they can compare. Future filmmakers can compare and the techniques used during that the earliest period up to the present time.
Gus and Dennis, the two authors in this book, were attempting to put forth a compendium, really a very, very encyclopedic reference book that attempts to cover 100 years of Philippine cinema. And this is something that is sorely needed because we don't have anything like this.
As film historian Nick Deocampo observed, cinema in the Philippines was born as twin to the nation and mirrored events surrounding and shaping the destiny of the emerging nation-state. During the Philippine-American War and the early years of American rule, The new colonizers used the art form of moving pictures as a propaganda tool to prop up their regime. In the US, James Henry White, Elias Burton Holmes, and C. Fred Ackerman produced newsreels about the Philippines for the American market. Both Ackerman and Holmes traveled to the Philippines to shoot travel shorts and newsreels on location. Later, former American military officer Frank H. Goulet opened the Lyric Theater and established the Lyric Film Exchange to engage in the distribution of foreign films. The cinematographo became so popular that the viewing public called the theater used for screening pictures the Cinematografo Teatro. They later coined the word cine as a generic term to refer to film, while they dubbed the place where it was projected a cinehan. The 1920s saw increased debate in the public sphere regarding women and modernity after women earned the right of suffrage in several countries. In the Philippines, this subject would remain a matter of raging discussion. On the cinema screen, Hollywood's images of modern women, including flappers, vamps, and other figures, were shocking to traditionalist Filipinos. There was much concern about these women appearing as sex objects or as models of what were now regarded as modern.
Especially Philippine cinema, no? I mean, it always reflects whatever is happening in society, and in particularly about the absence or presence of women, no? And women have always been present in Philippine cinema. Philippine cinema has been side by side, has been an ally in depicting and showing us how women have advanced in our society.
Although women have appeared on screen as a major part of the spectacle of cinema since its beginnings, there were a few Filipinos who expressed themselves and made their impression behind the camera in this new popular medium. 5 women particularly stand out in early Philippine cinema history for their roles in challenging the conservative mores of the time. Although many early films were in Spanish or English, by the end of the 1930s, Tagalog had become more and more clearly established as the lingua franca of Philippine cinema. This development paralleled the growing prominence of the Tagalog language in print, with serialized Tagalog novels or periodicals soaring in popularity. The close connection between literature and cinema could be seen by how quickly these novels were adapted for film. World War II and the Japanese occupation of the Philippines left lingering scars on Philippine society, even with the euphoria of victory and the war's end in 1945. Searing remembrances of war and suffering enveloped the nation. Filipinos flocked to the movies as a source of catharsis, a way to escape the horrors of the past or the uncertainties of the present. But post-war audiences could no longer be fully satisfied with the idyllic and simplistic, romantic, or comedic films of pre-war times. They wanted to see stories that in some way reflected the complex reality they lived in. Philippine cinema had entered a new uncharted era. This so-called golden age of Philippine cinema was marked by the re-emergence of the studio system that had begun in the 1930s. The great Filipino film studios, Sampaguita, Premiere, Lebran, LVN, would in time dominate the industry and exert oligopolistic control over the production and distribution of movies and the creation of movie stars. The 1960s was a decade of social unrest when the big 3 studios of Sampaguita, LVN, and Premiere found themselves dealing with an emerging organized labor movement. Movie crews demanded better pay and working conditions, thus driving up production costs. This, combined with escalating pay for actors and the difficulty of holding on to a stable of rising celebrity stars forced the once dominant studios to cede ground, little by little, to independent, contractual, and multi-star studios. The grim realities of martial law turned a generation of filmmakers away from escapism and crowd-pleasing formulaic storytelling. Although the dictatorship initially clamped down on the media, the film industry escaped relatively unscathed. However, state censorship now required the pre-approval of scripts prior to shooting. A generation of film artisans trained in academia arose, producing a new type of intelligent cinema. While remaining firmly in the orbit of commercial cinema, several outstanding directors emerged in the period of the new wave cinema of the 1970s and 1980s. Ishmael Bernal, Celso Ad Castillo, Mike De Leon, Peque Gallaga, Marilu Diaz-Abaya, Loris Guillen, and Mario O'Hara. A brilliant batch of independent filmmakers and original voices also emerged during this turbulent era, including Kidlat Tahimik, Raymond Red, and the documentary and short filmmaker Nick Deocampo.
It was in the era of martial law that the second golden age happened. And many masterpieces were made. It's a good thing many of these films still exist. So we're able to enjoy them, and the evidence is there that this indeed was the second golden age, and it was a kind of renaissance in spite of the, shall we say, the political situation at the time that inspired many of these filmmakers to come up with some of the most provocative works, and which I think have cemented their reputations, and also these films have made a dent in the movie going public, and not just in the Philippines, but I think also outside.
The public's longing for escapism from the harsh realities of poverty, crime, and social injustice had reached a peak in the 1960s and early 1970s when a young provincial singer named Nora Honor burst onto the scene and became an overnight sensation. Nora not only diverted the Philippine movie-going public from their growing demand for sex-related bold films, she also broke the ascendance of mestizo-looking actors that had been enforced by the studio system since the 1930s. Millions of disenfranchised fans identified strongly with Honor's rags-to-riches personal narrative. By the 1980s, Honor sought to make a film that would powerfully retell her story while giving back to her fans who had supported her through thick and thin. This was the iconic 1982 film, Himala, collaborated on by two outstanding film artisans, Ishmael Bernal and Ricky Lee.
And Nora Honor succeeded because I think the massa, they were able to identify with her and also with her suffering in her films. And they were able to relate to her because she looked like them. She was not glamorized, she was not mestiza, she was just one of them. And of course, her great talent in both acting and singing enhanced her reputation. And in particular, in the late 60s and the 70s, she was at the top of her game. She was phenomenal.
Political turmoil, public unrest, and uncertainty after 1986 fueled yet another resurgence of bold films, a phenomenon that mirrored the turbulent bomba era of the early 70s. Just as Nora Honor captured the public's attention away from the clamor for bomba films in the 1970s, a young singer emerged in the 1980s to break the trend toward bold films and seize the national imagination as a cinematic star, Charon Conetta. In many ways, Conetta seemed to follow the same path as Nora Honor. From being a teenage singing idol, she successfully crossed over to acting with massively successful teen flicks such as P.S. I Love You and Dear Heart, which paired her with on-screen love interest Gabby Concepcion.
She was first and foremost a teen star, and many people, especially the young ones, also identified with her. We have the so-called kilig effect in Philippine cinema. That's why when she appeared in many romance movies or teen romance movies with Gabby Concepcion, it became a hit.
The popularity in the 1980s of films and shows based on romance novel plots was tied in with the power of the emotional kilig factor to enthrall the Filipino public. Decades later, one on-screen couple epitomized the continuing hold of kilig on Filipino audiences. And the booming influence of social media and internet fandom on the film and entertainment industry. May Yaya Dub Mendoza and Alden Richards, known together as Aldub, became a phenomenon as two unlikely stars who were propelled from social media to television and then to the cinema by viral fandom.
Social media, yes, has been a very positive accomplice of the film industry. Without social media, we would not be discussing films. Because a lot of discussions now, especially during the age of streaming, has been through social media.
Well, it did improve the Philippine film industry in that many filmmakers can now present their movies in a social media platform, but it also killed many mainstream filmmakers by the way that many mainstream mainstream filmmakers now have to compete with social media in order to earn some income.
Digital technology and independent filmmaking invigorated Philippine cinema. Freed from having to cater to commercially oriented studios or mainstream audiences, younger filmmakers can run with riskier narratives, developing new types of filmic language and ways of seeing.
I guess these themes then and now, many of them still remain the same, except that the range of the stories has expanded. There were things that could not be expressed before because of stricter censorship and taboos. No? So now things are easier because a lot of restrictions have been lifted. And I think the audience is smarter now. Maybe there is a less authoritarian approach by our government in terms of what can be expressed. Although, of course, in certain situations, the waters are still being tested.
As the coronavirus spread across the globe in 2020, stringent quarantine and social distancing measures affected almost every aspect of life, and the film industry was no exception. While a traditional film set requires a crew of around 100 at least, under the new normal, this number must be reduced by half to ensure the safety and health of workers. Indie filmmakers and even big studios have circumvented these limitations on production by launching innovative web-based films and series such as Hello Stranger from ABS-CBN's Black Sheep Productions, a boys' love romance about two college students collaborating on a school project via Zoom.
The streaming services like Netflix or iFlix, as well as YouTube, for example, they changed the way we view films because now you can view your favorite films in the comfort of your home. And with the arrival of big TV screens as well as home sound system, you can enjoy films from the comfort of your home without going out to view them in cinema. And also the experience of going to the cinema, although it is much more exciting to go to the cinema than to be in the comfort of your in the time of this pandemic, we have no choice but to make do of what we have, just view these films in the internet.
In the age of streaming, there has been some kind of leveling the playing field. But at the same time, there is also a lot of leveling up happening because filmmakers have become more creative. They've become more innovative. They have started to see so many other examples, not just of Philippine cinema, but world cinema. They are exposed now. I think there's greater film literacy now, you know, among our filmmakers and film audience. And this can only mean that people will be looking, filmmakers will be making more newer, more exciting kinds of films, and the audience will also be looking for something new, something that is out of their usual realm of interest.
Through war, revolution, social upheaval, political turmoil, martial law, censorship, pandemic, the art of cinema has remained constant and yet ever-changing as the times. Changes in social norms, changes in government, changes in society, changes in fashion, changes in technology. All have shaped cinema, the twin of the nation, mirroring its history and projecting its image on screens, big and small.
Amazing work. Congratulations and special thanks to the Vibal Foundation's Executive Director and the President and Chair of Vibal Group Incorporated, one of the authors of the book, Mr. Gaspar Vibal, and the co-author who put forth such brilliant work to produce this book, Mr. Dennis Villegas. We'd also like to thank the CEO of Vibal Group Incorporated, Ms. Christine Mandigma, who is currently celebrating her birthday. Happy birthday, Ms. Teen, for her support to this project. Of course, this project would not have been possible if not for the diligent editorial team of Vibal Foundation. We'd also like to thank Vibal's multimedia team led by Mr. Patrick Olaita and the scriptwriters, Ms. Daniel Ann Tumbali and Ms. Andrea Peterson, who worked with yours truly in producing the book trailer video that we just saw moments ago. Moving on, it is time to see the short pre-recorded lecture of our guest speaker who also wrote the afterword for the book that we are celebrating this afternoon. Our webinar is titled Teaching Film, Integrating Film Literacy in the School Curriculum. And later you will have the chance to ask questions relevant to the lecture, to the speaker himself, and he will answer live. Our speaker is a filmmaker and film historian. He presently teaches as Associate Professor at the UP Film Institute in the University of the Philippines, Diliman. He took up his Master of Arts degree in Cinema Studies in New York University as a Fulbright Hays Scholar and received his certificate in film as a French government scholar in Paris, France. He has made more than 30 documentaries over a span of 40 years. His prize-winning works include Oliver, Revolutions Happen Like Refrains in a Song, and The Sex Warriors and the Samurai. As a film historian, he has authored books that won 4 national book awards like Cine Spanish Influences on Philippine Cinema, EGA Cinema and the Philippines During World War II, Beyond the Mainstream and Cine Gabay, a film study guide. An advocate for film literacy, our speaker this afternoon has conducted workshops and seminars to promote the use of film for education locally and abroad. He has taught in classes that produced a new generation of filmmakers working in short films, experimental cinema, and documentaries. He organized alternative film festivals that helped revolutionize Philippine alternative cinema. Among them were the Independent Film and Video Festival, International Pink Film Festival, and last year's UPFI Experimental Film Festival. As a recognized film personality, he has served as a member of the jury in several film festivals, such as the queer section of the Berlin Film Festival and other film festivals in Tokyo, Busan, Mexico, New Delhi, New York, Singapore, and Jakarta. As a scholar, he's been a recipient of various academic grants from the British Council to the Sumitomo Foundation. He was a former chair of the UNESCO Philippines Memory of the World Committee and president of NETPAC, or the Network of the Promotion of Asia-Pacific Cinema. Ladies and gentlemen, with his short pre-recorded lecture, Professor Nick Deocampo.
Hello everybody, I'm Professor Nick Deocampo from the University of the Philippines Film Institute. I am here to talk about a very important book that has just been published, and it is Philippine Cinema, 1897-2020. It is a book published by the Vibal Foundation Incorporated for Arte Filipino, and it's authored by Gaspar, Vibal, and Danny Villegas. The publication of the book allows us to reflect on the 123 years that cinema has been in the Philippines. It has blossomed and it has grown into a national culture, and this book is a testament to the resilient growth that it had despite all of the historical changes that happened in the Filipino society. The book has periodized these different episodes in the development of cinema based on the national political development. And we are able to see that cinema arrived in the Philippines at the time of the Spanish colonization. Nonetheless, it was towards the end, the last 2 years of the Spanish regime in the country. And it developed its formative years during the period of the American colonization, when Hollywood was on the rise as a global leader in terms of the development of cinema in the world. Further on, we could see that when World War II broke out, there was a cessation of the production of films, but almost like a miracle, Philippine cinema achieved its golden age by the 1950s. And after that, there was the period of martial law, and there was a very direct control made by the government on the development of the cinema until the dictatorship collapsed and democratization came into our society. And now it moved on all the way now to the digital era. All that I'm saying here is that this book has really encapsulated the history of cinema as it developed in the country, and for its launching, I am here to share with you ways in which film can be taught in our schools. I know that many of you out there are teachers, academics, scholars, researchers, students, who really would like to know how film is taught or can be taught in our classes. We have oftentimes heard that there is something that we can learn from film. But what is it exactly that we can learn from film? And the most important thing for me as an educator is, how do we really learn from film? What exactly are the elements in film that we are able to use, to deploy, in order that we will be able to know what the film is trying to put across? In short, we are going to engage ourselves in the production of knowledge. We would like to know exactly how film, as motion pictures, no different from a book, is able to produce knowledge. And I am not just talking about knowledge regarding cinema, but rather knowledge about many things that we are learning in school. For example, the social sciences. How do we learn history? How do we learn psychology, anthropology, sociology? For example, in the sciences, how do we learn the biological arts, chemistry? How can film be used to learn all these academic subjects? What about gender, spirituality, environment, disaster risk management? All of these things are very important. Culture, literature, arts, all of this have been subjects of cinema, although in this country, in the Philippines, we have been very much drowned by the production of commercial movies. We have been so much influenced by the entertainment and commercial aspects of Hollywood cinema that our film has also imitated the escapist values of movie making. But today, let us try to be true to ourselves as academics, as teachers, and try to see how exactly film may be used for educational purposes. And so there are different ways that film can be used to teach. But because of my very limited time, I am only given 1 hour to talk. Let me focus at least on 2 subjects that we can talk about, although I can also bring up other academic disciplines along the way. But mainly, I am interested in cinema as history and cinema as communication. But along the way, we can talk about society, we can talk about politics, we can talk about technology, we can talk about gender, we can talk about culture, and so many other things. So, how do we really teach history? The interesting thing about the development of cinema is that cinema was not indigenous to the Philippines. Filipinos did not invent film. It was an imported commodity that was brought to us 2 years before the Spaniards were kicked out of the country. First, by the revolution that the Filipinos waged, although it did not really fully succeed, but it was really with the arrival of another set of colonizers, the Americans, who finally drove the Spanish colonizers out of the country. When it first arrived, it developed, or it was shown at a very perilous time. No film was produced in the country yet, but it was mainly as a foreign imported commodity or device. Its first function was to show movies. It arrived in 1896, and it is very significant what exactly happened in 1896. We know very well that in our political history, 1896 was when the Philippine Revolution broke out. Andres Bonifacio declared already an armed revolution against the Spaniards, and what happened was, if the motion pictures arrived around October or maybe early part of December, in the newspaper El Comercio, in the early, maybe up to mid-December, there were announcements saying that film was going to be shown in Escolta at number 12, numero 12, Interior Escolta, Manila. However, much as there was some funfair announcements that showed that film will be shown maybe around Christmas time, it never happened. One wonders why film was not really shown at the time that it was announced, maybe around Christmas time, a perfect time to inaugurate the screening of the movies. Now we know why. I hypothesize about it, but who can ignore the imminent, the forthcoming execution of our national hero, Dr. Jose Rizal, on December 30 in 1896. So who is the businessman who would like to inaugurate his new business, like film showing, just a week or a few days before the dreaded event of the execution of our national martyr? I'm sure Manila was gripped in terms of fear, in terms of dread. And so Manila may not be necessarily at a standstill, but businesses were not really keen or enthusiastic to really operate, in full speed. And therefore, what happened was, there was fear that maybe the revolutionarios would invade Manila, perhaps, to disrupt the execution of Rizal. But come December 30, Rizal was finally executed. And nothing really happened. There was no assault of the revolutionarios. And then there was December 31, nothing happened. And it was on January 1, 1897. January 1, 1897, film was finally shown at number 12 in Interior, Escolta. So this was a historic event because motion picture was finally shown in the country. Finally, it's here. Finally, people could see it. But the important thing that I'm trying to say here is that film arrived at a very dramatic moment of our history. Soon after, another event happened which really threatened the Spaniards in the country. That was the declaration or the outbreak of the Spanish-American War. So we already have our Philippine Revolution against Spain. We were waging it. We were coming close to winning the revolution. But a world event happened. The Spanish-American War broke out, which brought the U.S. naval fleet of Commodore George Dewey to do battle at the Manila Bay. And during the battle at Manila Bay on May 1, 1896, the Spanish Armada was brought to its knees, it was defeated, and that brought the end of the Spanish rule in the country. So we are now in 1898, and Americans were the next colonizers of the country, and by fate, we see that the Americans would not only become the new superpower of the 20th century, but because of its leadership in film production and film distribution, because of Hollywood, America would also lead the world in terms of film making and film promotion and film distribution. And so we were doubly colonized. We were colonized politically, militarily by the Americans, but we were also colonized culturally because of the films that began to dominate the cultural life of Filipinos. But let me say exactly that the drama did not end there. By 1899, when General Aguinaldo found out that the Americans wanted to stay in the country, of course, he declared war against these Americans. And so the Philippine-American War of 1899 happened. And I will just stop there in terms of the drama, because now we begin to see that the birth of cinema, which came right 2 days after the death of Dr. Jose Rizal, was also swaddled or enveloped by our Spanish Revolution against Spain, by the Spanish-American War, by the Philippine-American War. And so napakamasalimuot ng pagdating at ng kapanganakan ng pelikula sa ating bansa dahil ito ay napalibutan ng maraming mga madugo at sobrang napakadramatikong mga pangyayari sa ating lipunan. But I'll move on from there. All I'm saying here is that in the development of cinema in the country, history is written large. And therefore, we can, in teaching cinema, we can really relate cinema in terms of the social developments happening in the country. If we go next to the next slide that I have prepared, we can see there the periodization of cinema, which is very, very much reflected and highly visualized in the film of Vibal and Villegas, wherein we could see that cinema developed mainly first as a kind of a primitive cinema during its early cinema period. In other words, film was silent, film was in black and white. And so there is this language used in Western scholarship that, I don't like the word itself, but the primitive cinema refers mainly to the early beginnings of cinema when it only lasted for around less than a minute. They were just very short films in black and white, as I said, and silent. The early cinema did not really last long. During the American colonial period, it really blossomed because as a colony of America, a lot of the productions that came from Hollywood, while it was rising as a film capital of the world, the Philippines was among the first places, if not the first, most especially in Asia, to really be getting all of the film products coming from Hollywood. So we were very familiar with many of the Hollywood films that were being produced since the early years, the 1910s. All the way to the present in the time of Netflix. But in between, during period when cinema was developing in the country, the formative years of cinema were really made during the period of the American colonization that will bring us all the way to around the outbreak of World War II. Before we go to the Second World War, let me really just say, if we are going to ask ourselves, why do we have the kind of cinema that we have? It is because mainly it was influenced by Hollywood, which allowed the Filipinos really to mimic and to copy the following values of American cinema. It is commercial, it is capitalist, it is escapist, it is mainly narrative in format. In other words, dramatic in form. There are many other ways of making movies, which I will discuss in a little while, but mainly the film that developed in the country is dramatic narrative, a lot of acted films with script that became commercial and escapist, full of entertainment, whereas other films, such as in Europe, for example, other forms of cinema like documentaries and experimental films and short films also flourished, but not so much in the Philippines. But that will be a subject we'll discuss later on. For my second subject, in terms of teaching film, paano ba na ituturo ang pelikula? Ang pangalawang ituturo ko ngayon ay tungkol sa pelikula bilang komunikasyon. Film as communication is the next topic that I'm going to talk about. And here, we are not just talking about commercial films or the history of film itself, but now we can really talk about other things like gender, like environment, like society, like everything else. When we talk about film as communication, and I am showing you on the screen right now a film literacy diagram. I want you to take a look at this diagram, wherein I am able to show that at the center of it, we have what is the definition of cinema or film or movie. I have a very simple definition of cinema or film or movie, and that is, it is a motion picture or a moving picture. Alright? Of course, it should have sound. In the present day that we have, we cannot really watch movies without dialogue or sound. But mainly, cinema is motion picture. And motion picture is a sign, which is no different from a word in literature or that which you read in a book. However, a film, just like a book, you have these sign elements or the visual elements that you are able to see when you watch a film, and those signs or visuals are encoded with meaning. It is because they are encoded with meaning that cinema is able to communicate. Communicate what? A message. Alright? A message about what? A message about two people in love, a message about a beautiful day, a message about war, a message about fear when we watch horror film, for example, a message about laughter when we watch comedies, a message about suffering when we watch melodrama. So there is message, and the message is really part of the communication system, where cinema is considered to be a medium upon which we are able to communicate with each other. But the question that we have right now is, what exactly is it in film as motion picture that it is able to communicate? We know, and we have studied for 20 years, since kindergarten all the way to elementary, high school, and tertiary grade, we have been so dependent in books in terms of the production of knowledge, the production of meaning. We have been so dependent on the written word. So in the age now, especially in the 20th century, and more so in the 21st century, we are now surrounded by an audiovisual culture. Communication is happening beyond the books, beyond mere oral communication. We are surrounded by audiovisual communication. Our cell phone is full of moving pictures. Television that we watch, puro motion pictures. Our internet, our computer. In fact, we are so bored if what we are watching is not moving. So news right now, news is full of moving pictures. All right? So it appears like we really are learning from these images that we see. So what I am going to share with you right now, especially to my fellow teachers out there, is so when we teach film as a communication system, I think we really need to know what are the film elements, what are the parts of a film that really produce meaning. So I have spelled out 8 elements that you will see on the screen. Let me name them. The first one is story, direction, cinematography, production design, editing, music, sound, and acting or performance. Very quickly, let me talk about them, okay? Very quickly, let me see and show you how they work in terms of the production of meaning. When we go and watch a movie, usually what is our takeaway after watching a movie is, you know, the story was good, all right? We always connect with the film in terms of the story. There's nothing wrong in that. But when I teach my classes, especially in terms of directing or in terms of other subjects, even script writing, I tell them that film is not literature. Ang pelikula ay hindi literatura. Malaki ang pagkakaiba ng pelikula sa literatura, sa tula, sa sayaw, sa architecture, sa sculpture, sa teatro. Iba't ibang mga uri ito ng sining, kung saan ang pelikula ay uri din ng sining. Film is one of the arts that we have, and yet film needs to be established in terms of its autonomous properties. What makes film film? Paano nga ba ang pelikula ay isang pelikula at hindi tula, hindi sayaw, at hindi sculpture? Okay? So ang pelikula ay moving pictures, mainly that is its main element, of which story is only a part of the 8 elements that it has. Sadly, dahil nga sa ating mga pagtuturo rin, tayo rin kuminsan ang dapat i-blame dyan ng mga guro. Pag nagtuturo tayo ay kwento lamang ng pelikula ang ating itinuturo. Para bang nagtuturo tayo ng short story o ng novel. Hindi dapat yan ang approach natin sa pagtuturo ng pelikula. Ang pelikula ay may mga cinematic properties na sasabihin ko in a little while. Alright? Ito ang shot, edit, movement of the camera, at ang sound. Pero bago tayo pumunta dyan sa mga katangi-tanging properties ng pelikula, ay pag-aralan natin, no, na hindi lamang ang kwento ang mahalaga sa pelikula, dahil ang pelikula ay moving picture ito. Ang trabaho ng direktor ay ang pag-encode, ang pagbigay ng kahulugan, ng meaning, no, sa pelikula. Mula doon sa script na binasa niya. Ang direktor, ang konduktor, siya ang author ng pelikula, samantalang ang scriptwriter, ang author ng script. Huwag kayong magkamali na ang scriptwriter ang author ng pelikula. Ang may akda ng script ay ang scriptwriter, samantalang ang may akda ng pelikula ay ang direktor. Dahil ang direktor, siya ang namamahala sa lahat ng mga elementong sinasabi ko na ito. Mula pa sa ilaw, hanggang sa tunog, hanggang sa musika, hanggang sa paggalaw ng mga artista, pag-emote, lahat yan ay inaasikaso ng direktor. Siya ang pinanggagalingan ng maraming kahulugan na makikita natin sa pelikula. At pupunta rin tayo sa cinematography, kasama na ang lighting o pag-iilaw. Dito makikita natin na may kahulugan din na maaaring lumabas mula doon sa pag-iilaw. Alright? At ganoon din sa design. Lahat ito ay ipapakita ko in a little while. Ang editing o ang pagtagpi-tagpi ng mga eksena, ang tunog, ang sound, alright? At ang musika. Lahat ito ay nag-aambag ng kahulugan kung saan overall, pag nanonood tayo ng pelikula, ito lahat ay ating nakukuha at hindi nyo lang namamalayan, may mga subliminal meanings na pumapasok sa ating isipan kung saan sa huli ay nakakakuha tayo ng kahulugan. So, sa huli nagko-communicate ang pelikula sa pamamagitan ng 8 elementong ito. Some of them are very obvious, such as the story, for example, and in Private Benjamin, o di kaya Zombadings, o di kaya pelikulang Ora Pro Nobis. So, yan ang nakukuha agad natin na na kwento. Pero, maliban pa doon, kung pag-aralan ninyong mabuti ang film language or ang lengguwahe ng pelikula, ito ay nagsasalita rin visually sa pamamagitan ng mise-en-scène or ng composition ng mga shots sa pelikula. May mapupulot din tayo ng kahulugan mula doon sa paglagay ng mga shots, pagsama-sama sa mga shots na ito sa pamamagitan ng editing o di kaya sa paggamit ng sound. Alright? Yung sinasabi ko kanina na 4 na cinematic properties na nagbibigay sa pelikula ng kanyang katangian. Ito ang shot, ang editing, ang camera movement, at ang sound. At ipapakita ko ito sa inyo. Unang-una, pag-aralan natin ang shot. Ang shot ay napapaloob sa frame. Dito tayo nagbabasa. Dito magsisimula ang ating pagtuturo, mga teacher, kapwa kong teacher. Ito ang teksto ng pelikula. Kung ang libro ay merong pahina at dito nababasa natin ang mga kataga, ang mga salita, at dito natin nakukuha ang kahulugan para maintindihan natin kung ano ang sinasabi ng libro. Sa pelikula tayo ay may teksto rin at yan ang shot. Panoorin natin ang shot na ito. Ito ay kuha sa pelikula na ginawa ko noong EDSA Revolution noong Pebrero 1986. Kung saan samantalang nag-video ako, dahil documentary ito, nahagip ng camera ko itong bandila natin na mukhang baliktad yata. So kung panoorin yung mabuti, paano natin babasahin ang kahulugan ng digmaan ng revolusyon sa shot na ito? Huwag ibaliwala ang kahulugan ng nakikita natin sa shot na ito. Ang shot na ito ay nagsasalita visually. Wala akong subtitle na ginamit sa ilalim. Wala kang maririnig na voice-over na magsasabi na the Philippines now is in a state of war. No. In fact, ang taong humawak ng bandila na yan, siya ay nagsasalita sa atin visually rin. Nang binaliktad niya ang ating bandila at pula na ang nasa itaas, na ituro sa atin yan sa mga klase natin, sa pamilya natin, na pagsasabi na pag nabaliktad ang senyales na yan, tayo ay nasa panahon ng digmaan. Kahindik-hindik ang pakiramdam ko na makita ko ang shot na yan. At salamat na lamang at na-capture siya ng camera ko, samantalang ako ay nasa EDSA at ako ay nagdo-document. Gumagawa ako ng aking dokumentaryo tungkol sa mahalagang pagkakataon na yon. So, yan ay isang uri ng pagsasalita, no? Ng pagkakaroon ng kahulugan. Tayo ay nagre-react sa signs. Kung gusto niyo mas malalim na usapan ay sa semiotic sign. Semiotics is the science of signs. Semiotics is the way of learning about the meanings of signs. At yan ay aking itinuturo rin sa aking mga klase. Kung kaya dito, paano natin maituturo ang pelikula? Paano natin maituturo ang revolusyon, ang February Revolution that we have sa pamamagitan ng mga imaheng nakikita natin? Ito ay isang ehemplo lamang. Punta pa tayo sa isa. Ang isang pelikula pa na pwede natin pag-aralan ay tungkol naman sa kasarian or gender. Tingnan niyong mabuti ang picture na ito ng isang babae na halos hubad na at nakaharap sa inyo na walang kahihiyan at halos umiindak pa siya at ipinagmamalaki niya pa. Napakaraming kahulugan ang pwede natin maibigay sa pelikulang ito. Alright? Ang problema lamang kasi, samantalang pinapanood natin ang pelikula kung saan nanggaling ang shot na ito, at ito ay Burlesque Queen, 1977, nanalo sa Metro Manila Film Festival. Ang artista na ito ay si Vilma Santos, na ngayon ay congresswoman na naging mayor ng Lipa. So kilalang kilala siya, reyna din siya ng pelikulang Pilipino katulad ni Ate Guy, ni Nora Honor. Pero dito, makita na natin na si Vilma Santos ay tumawid na sa mature role na tinatawag. May sariling kasaysayan ang imaheng ito. Ito ang unang pagsadlak ni Vilma Santos sa mga matured roles kasi nung una, pa-cute-cute, pa-tweetums-tweetums pa siya, pa-sweetheart-sweetheart lang siya nung una. Partner niya pa si Edgar Mortiz. Alright? Pakanta-kanta lang siya na I Am 16. Alright? Sweet 16. Mga ganun ang kanyang mga kanta pa noong una. Napaka-inosente niya. Pero sa pelikulang ito ni Celso Ad Castillo, ngayon ay talagang siya ay naging mapangahas. So, pwedeng isang kahulugan dyan ay ang kasaysayan ng artistang si Vilma Santos kung saan siya ay talagang umiba ng landas na at naging matured actress. Nanalo siya ng Best Actress dito, pero nagsaulian ng awards because may iskandalong nangyari doon sa Metro Manila Film Festival na wala na tayong panahon para pag-usapan ito. Pero paano pa natin maituturo ang pelikulang ito? Sa imahe na ito, pwede natin maituturo ang tungkol sa kasarian, gender. Pwede nating hatiin ang klase natin at pagsabihan na sino sa inyo ang naiiskandalo sa imaheng ito? Bakit? Sino sa inyo ang hindi naiiskandalo dito, kundi nakikita nila ang tapang at ang lakas ng kababaihan na ginagamit ang katawan nila sa panahon. Alalahanin natin kung kailan ginawa ito. 1970s, lugmok ang ekonomiya ng Pilipinas. Walang mga paktorya ang Pilipinas kung saan mabibigyan ng trabaho ang kababaihan. Pagpuputa na lumaki ako sa panahon na yan. Kitang-kita ko ang mga kababaihan natin, nagpuputa sa ermita. Dahil wala namang trabaho maibibigay sa panahon ng diktadurya. Mas madali pa ang magputa ng panahon na yon, na mag-prostitute ng sarili niya, mabilis ang pera doon. Kasi wala namang garment factory kung saan pwede kababaihan ay pwede magtrabaho. So dito, nakita natin na kapit sa patalim na ang karakter ni Vilma Santos dito. So, sino tayo para maghusga sa moralidad ng mga pangyayari? Ang hinihingi ng eksena ay isang malaking debate. Ano ang ginawa natin sa mga kababaihan natin ng panahon na yon? Bakit mapaghusga na lamang tayo na, naku, bad yan, Ate V, bad yan. Bad talaga yan, hindi maganda yung prostitution. Oo, hindi na nga maganda. Pero ano ang katotohanan at realidad? All I'm trying to say here is that pwede natin sa ating pagtuturo sa klase natin ay mapakita hindi lamang ang mga moralidad ng ating relihiyon o ng ating lipunan, kundi ipakita rin ang katotohanan, ang social realism that happened during that time. Ano ba yung mga realidad kung saan ang mga kababaihan, ang kalahati sa populasyon natin, na siyang nagpapakain sa mga pamilya nila kung saan ang asawa nila ay lasenggo. Ang tatay nila ay may ibang pamilya, walang trabaho. Ang kuya nila ay tagabukas sa kotse. Kababaihan ang sumalba sa maraming pamamaraan sa ating lipunan. So, all I'm trying to say is, nakita nyo, napaka-passionate na ng aking presentation dahil lamang sa isang picture na ito. Okay, ngayon, let us move on to the rest. Panoorin pa natin ang isang imaheng ito. Alright, ito ay ang pag-aaral naman natin tungkol sa panahon ng Espanyol kung saan makikita natin na ang marginalization sa pag-aaral natin dito sa pelikulang Ganito Kami Noon, Paano Kayo Ngayon. Tayo ay makikita natin na sa panahon ng Espanyol, ang marginalization ng mga peasants sa paanan, literally sa paanan ng mga pare, makikita natin na ito ay nailalarawan sa pelikula ni Eddie Romero, Ganito Kami Noon, Paano Kayo Ngayon. Makikita natin na nasa dulo, sa paanan mismo ng pare, ng praile na ito ni si Padre Gil, si Christopher De Leon na gumaganap sa papel ni Nicolas. At dito makikita nga natin na talagang napaka-visual ng marginalization na nangyayari dito sa pelikulang ito. At ito ay napag-aaralan natin sa pamamagitan ng pagpwesto ng mga karakter dito sa shot na ito. Kung saan ang social standing or social stature ni Nicolas bilang isang pesante, isang marginal character sa ating lipunan, ay inilagay mismo doon sa pinaka-margin ng pelikula. Hindi ba napaka-visual niyan, napaka-literal, at may katuturan, may kahalagahan. Kitang-kita natin kung paano nagsasalita ang pelikula. At ang huling picture natin na ipapakita ay tungkol naman sa kay Jose Rizal. Kaya pelikula ni Marilu Diaz-Abaya kung saan sa huling yugto sa buhay ni Jose Rizal, samantalang siya ay papunta na sa Bagumbayan para babarilin, ano ba't nakitaan sa pelikula ni Marilu Diaz-Abaya na si Rizal ay may hawak na rosarito? Totoo ba na ano ang kahalagahan ng imaheng ito? Bakit mahalaga na makita natin o mali ba na may hawak na rosaryo si Rizal? Napaka-political ng pagbabasa sa pelikulang ito. At eto na naman, paano natin maituturo sa ating klase ito? Ito ay ang pagbabasa ng kasaysayan o di kaya paglabag ng kasaysayan sa pamamagitan ng imaheng nakikita natin. Si Rizal ba sa paghahawak ng rosaryong ito ay nagbalik loob sa simbahang Katoliko? Marami sa ating mga historiador nagsabi na hindi. Isang mason si Rizal. Hindi siya nagbalik loob. Marami ang nagsasabi na hindi nagbalik loob si Rizal sa simbahang Katolika. Kaya hindi pwedeng may hawak siya na rosaryo. Kaya isang malaking paglabag ito sa kasaysayan. Hindi makatotoo ang eksenang ito at dapat tayong mga guro, mabilis ang ating mga mata sa pagbasa ng mga pelikulang katulad nito kasi pwedeng lumampas lamang ito sa ating pansin at isang kamalian ang pwedeng pumasok sa isipan ng ating mga kabataan. So to finish this presentation, I only have 5 more slides to show. And what we can now teach is not just the form of film that we are able to share with our students, but rather outside of a more formalistic study of cinema, we are also able to teach film in relation to context. And context is very, very important because context provides the background or the circumstance behind an event or a phenomenon that is being shown in the film. And context may mean the political circumstance, the history, the social and economic circumstances. So this all consists of a context. So that we are not only studying film as a communicative form, but rather we also get to learn, and for us teachers who are able to teach the significance of film as a socially relevant topic, all right? For example, in the images that you saw earlier about the EDSA revolution, it is not just important to show the image of the inverted flag, but rather you can use that image or the film itself, the documentary that I made, which has the title Revolutions Happen Like Refrains in a Song. We are able to teach the significance of democratization process or the right of people to rebel against corrupt authorities. And we will be able to talk about the political system under the Marcos regime and how does it compare, for example, with the democratization that was the aspiration of the Aquino government. And so for the final films that I am going to show, we are going to talk about one particular film that was made during the period of the American colonization. This is a very old film. It's called Advance of Kansas Volunteers at Caloocan. It was made in 1899 by the studio of Thomas Alva Edison. Why is this important? Is because it's a very rare film. In fact, it was lost for almost like 50 years and it was later on found and a copy was made. And significantly, the film shows the battle that happened between Filipino revolutionaries and the American soldiers. And the film suggests itself to have been made, or the event in the film is suggested to have had happened at Caloocan. However, the film is not really, if you're going to see it, the image in this particular shot shows us the supposedly Filipinos, in quotation marks, occupying the entire shot from one end of the frame to the other. And then in the second shot, we are able to see the Americans assaulting the screen, and they drive away the Filipinos who earlier occupied the same cinematic space or the shot. This is a very clear case and a very visual presentation of the theme of colonization, wherein one party, the American soldiers, invade the cinematic space, which is the shot, and would drive away the inhabitants, the original inhabitants of that shot, meaning the Filipinos, so that in the end, instead of the Filipinos occupying the screen, what we see are Americans now dominating the scene. So in this dramatic visual presentation of the Filipinos being dislodged, being displaced in terms of their territorial space by the Americans, we see that there is a parallel between the actual event that happened during the time of the American colonization, wherein the Americans gained the Filipino territory and pushed aside our rebellions, our freedom fighters, pushing them outside of our own territory, and in the end, who would dominate the land? These are the Americans, whereas we Filipinos almost became second citizens to these Americans who started to control our government, to control our politics, to control our economics, to control our military, to control our schools, and many other aspects of our lives. So the film, you will be able to teach or to use this film in order to show the very context, the very circumstance of the American colonialism and how it was very disadvantageous to Filipinos. And the film that we show here, Advance of Kansas Volunteers at Caloocan, is able to visually show that kind of political disempowerment, military disempowerment that happened in reality during this very historical period. And I will end this presentation by talking about the historical context and the historical relevance of why we do films and what is it that we are able to teach. So let me focus on my favorite topic, which is history and cinema. Let us see exactly how film across the years, from the time of the Americans down to the period of Rizal and all the way to the present, that we are able to encode history in terms of the cinematic process. Film is a good reflection of our society and of our history, as film is able to provide through the verisimilitude of the images and of the stories that are being shown in this cinematic device. We are able to see what happened to our society, and even if there is not really a genuine fidelity to real events, somehow the films are able to give us reflections of those history that we are able to discuss among ourselves, even debate among ourselves. We may not all totally agree to what really happened, or whether we really need to like General Luna as a person or as a hero, whether Rizal was really and should be our national hero and not Andres Bonifacio. All these debates are important, and these films are there to serve as lessons in terms of our historical knowledge. So I will end this by saying exactly that films are important in terms of the production of knowledge. It is as significant as books. In fact, films, the audiovisual medium that we see on television, that we see in our computer, that we see in our cell phones, the audiovisual medium is the new book. We are able to read, and many of our students are more inclined to watch movies, and as we know, although that's quite sad, they'd rather watch films rather than read books, although that should not really be the case. But let us also adjust to that situation. So the challenge for us now is, how can we really make use of film as a new text for learning? It's for us to really study how films as a text, as a formalistic embodiment of knowledge, as well as the context or the circumstantial knowledge that goes side by side with the text. How can we make use of all of these elements of film in order for us to really teach and to advance knowledge among our students and in our society? So I hope that this very, very compressed period, when I'm able to share with you some of the processes and some of the fundamental elements in learning through film, I was able to give you some perhaps tools, some added tools for you to also be able to use film in your classes in the production of knowledge. And with that, I thank you very much. Together with the book of Gas Vibal and Dennis Villegas, the important thing is that while this is a book that talks about films, it is important that we make good use of the films, of these audiovisual materials in our classes, so that we may be able to not so much as entertain our students, but to be able to give knowledge to our students about the many things that happen in our society and in our lives. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you very much for that excellent talk, Professor Nick Deocampo. Now, to answer some questions from the audience, let me call on the live stream our guest speaker, Professor Nick Deocampo.
Can you put me on video? It said, okay, start my video.
All right.
All right, there you are.
Great. A pleasure to see you once again, sir.
Thank you very much.
Okay, so at this juncture, sir, we're going to answer questions from the public. First of all, I'd just like to congratulate you for that wonderful discussion. It was filled with learning. I'm sure the teachers would appreciate that. And just to remind everybody, we actually have a teaching guide prepared for you guys. For those who clicked going on our Facebook event, you guys have incentives. So please save those files, because you will need that in the future, right? So for the first question, Prof. Nick, while I'm looking for some questions, would you like to greet people or viewers?
It's sad I cannot see you, but I hope you are all there. And I'm very happy that we have this opportunity given to us by Vibal Group to talk about this very important book that has just been published. I hope your schools will get copies of this, because inside the pages of this book are, the different topics that we can possibly discuss in our classes. Here you will see that film is not just an isolated phenomenon or isolated aspect of our society, but rather it is very much stitched. Naitatahi siya sa ating lipunan, kung saan makikita natin na ito ay nahubog ng mga mahahalagang political events and political developments and social cultural developments in our society. So film, as I have claimed in many of my books, is a twin to the nation. And I do hope we can have a very interesting discussion ahead of us.
Okay, so I just jump on to our first question. It's from Mr. Raymark Romaso Casipit. How can cinema influence modern issues like gender equality? I think it is referring to gender equality, environmental unawareness, and political matters in a positive way?
All right. First, let me really address the significance of film. So, film as a form of mass media is very influential because of the very verisimilitude, okay, the likeness that it casts in terms of representing reality. So, it is the big difference between film and many of the other arts that it is able to really influence us because of the images that look lifelike. All right, so this is what is called the verisimilitude, masyadong makatotohanan, and because of that, it is very influential because representations of gender, representations of the environment or of politics are seen almost lifelike. To whom? Seen by whom? Seen by also a very impressive audience. Madaling ma-impress ng mga tao. In other words, we have heard it so many times, to see is to believe. All right, much as it's a very problematic phrase, but in a normal setup, many of us easily believe what we see. That's why I say, we can be a very influential crowd when we watch a movie. And so the question now that is being asked is, how can cinema influence all these modern issues? Do we have the right representations out there? Cinema, you must realize, is not a privileged medium. There was a time wherein those who are in power, those who were in power, had access only to film. These are the elite capitalists, these are the colonial administrators, these are the people who were in control of capital or money that they can only make films. Let's just go back to the 1950s. Golden age ng golden age tayo, pero golden age lang talaga siya in terms of the four families that controlled the four movie studios that controlled the movie industry in this country. These were the De Leons, Villoncos, the LVN, okay, the Vera Perez of Sampaguita, the Santiagos of Premier, and then the Navarros of the Lebran. So in what way they made representations of the woman, the Filipino woman, that's the kind of movie that we watched. Pero ang tanong nga dito nga, Bale, I'm sure mas ang sinasabi niya ay contemporary, no? Sa panahon ngayon ng digital age, tanungin natin ang sarili natin, samantalang hawak-hawak na natin ang mga cellphone natin, ang mga camera natin, Bale, ano ang uri ng representasyon ng kababaihan, ng mga bakla, lesbian at transgender, ng mga indigenous people natin, ng ating kalikasan? Ano bang mga representasyon ang ating pinapalabas? Dito ay kailangan na natin na makibaka. Ako ay isang bakla. Ilang beses ko sinasabi yan, ang kauna-unahang pelikula ko ay tungkol sa bakla. Ipinaglalaban ko ang bakla dahil lumaki akong bakla. At hindi ko maintindihan bakit ako pinagtatawanan ng dahil dyan sa pelikulang Pacifica Falayfay. Dahil dyan sa mga pelikulang katawa-tawa lamang ang bakla, hindi ko na matanggap yan. Nag-aral ako sa Paris, nag-aral ako sa New York. Pagbalik ko dito, sandali ka. Larangan ng labanan ang pelikula. Hindi yan hawak lamang. Sinubukan ko na rin bilang bakla ang gumawa ng pelikula na sa paningin ko ay mas makatotohanan sa aking buhay at sa kalakhang katotohanan sa ating lipunan. Ang mga manikurista natin ay manggagawa din yan. Kaya anong uri ng pelikula ang ating gagawin? Ang kababaihan natin nung nilecture ko ang Burlesque Queen. Nasa panig ako ng mga kababaihan kahit pa sabihin na natin na makasalanan at masama ang pagputa, ngunit ang konteksto ng pag-usbong ng ganyang klaseng representasyon, alamin natin panahon yun ng diktadurya kung saan ang mga kababaihan ang sumalba sa ating lipunan dahil marami sa ating mga kalalakihan ay walang trabaho o di kaya nakapiit dahil mga rebelde. So, isulong natin ang ating karapatan para magkaroon ng makatotohanang representasyon. Tungkol sa kalikasan, mahalaga din yan. Dahil kung hindi natin ipinapakita sa pamamagitan ng dokumentaryo, sa mga makatotohanang pelikula, ang pagkalbo ng mga kagubatan natin sa Montalban, edi anong nangyayari? Edi dumating si Ulysses, binaha, nalunod ang marami. Bawat taon na lamang ganyan ang buhay natin eh. Pero bawat taon, kinakalbo natin ang mga kagubatan sa Montalban. Hindi lang dyan, marami pa. Sa lahat na isla ng bansang ito, kinakalbo natin lahat yan. Eh anong pelikula ang ginagawa natin? Magagamit natin ang pelikula sa pagpapalabas ng mga realidad sa ating lipunan. Kaya ako, para sa akin, mahalaga ang ating gagampanan bilang mga guro. Ipalabas din natin ang mga pelikula na nagpapakita na hindi man ito propaganda, pero ang ibig kong sabihin ay magkaroon ng debate at malayang ninilay-nilay sa ating mga klase. So, huling sasabihin ko lang ay ang pelikula ay isang contested medium. Hindi yan pagmamayari ng isang uri sa ating lipunan na may pribilehyo. Kaya mayaman siya, iba ang class standing niya, huwag nating isipin yun dahil tayo na kahit mga maralita, kahit ay mga bakla o nasa marginal, nasa laylayan ng ating lipunan, kaya na rin natin gumawa ng mga pelikula at mailabas ang ating adhikain.
That was an interesting point, Prof. Nick. Actually, it opened our eyes to the harsh realities now in the filmmaking industries, and also, of course, as consumers of media, it's somehow opened our eyes to the idea that we need to also pick the films that we are supposed to watch.
Correct.
Because actually, whatever we consume is what the filmmakers create, because that's what brings them money, right? So we have to be also responsible in consuming media. So I think that's the point of the entire message. Now we have a long question over here, but I guess what made it long is the message. But the question basically is, how long do you think it will take for alternative cinema to have the same popularity or impact as the new wave in the film? But he has a follow-up message, Prof. Nick. I will read it for you. Thank you, Sir Nick, for helping me with finding new answers I needed for my thesis on the new wave in the film. You helped me, especially when you talked to me when you had the Greenbelt 3 showing of your films, and encouraged me to go through 2 cycles of the hidden camera exhibit and learn more about Philippine cinema. Wow, amazing. Okay, so did you get the question, sir?
I did. All right. Okay. So mahalaga itong tanong, Bale, no? Pero I will have to really be frank about this in saying na I think there may be no point, Luigi, for us to really make a comparison between the alternative cinema, which I strongly represent. And let me just tell you, Luigi, that I am finishing a 500-page book right now on alternative cinema. Sana ma-publish ng Vibal. All right, but anyway.
Looking forward to that, sir.
All right, but let us make, ang gusto mo ikumpara dito ay itong new wave in the cinema. And I'm sure you're referring to Cinemalaya and Cinema One, etc. Para sa aking pagtatanaw sa kasaysayan natin, ang tinatawag natin na indie cinema na ito ay talagang kaakibat ng commercial movie industry. Kitang-kita na natin sa Cinemalayang right now na in the end pala talagang they will be the ones who will take the position of what appears to be the collapse of the traditional movie industry natin. So sa huli, at sa aking pagsusulat ng kasaysayan, mula pa ng 1950s, panahon ng LVN, andyan na ang mga unang indie filmmakers natin na sina Fernando Poe Sr. at Rogelio de la Rosa. Mali ang iniisip ng lahat na ang indie filmmaking nangyari lang sa digital at Cinemalaya ang pinanggalingan nito. Isang malaking kamalian yan if you're going to look at it historically. In other words, indie cinema has really been very much a shadow of the movie industry. Okay. Having said that, we are now comparing apples with oranges. Ay, naku, bakit naman napakabanyaga ng aking sample ng mga bayabas at ng mangga, okay? Kasi ang tingin ko naman sa alternative cinema ay ito talaga, wala siyang pretensyon na siya ay magiging commercial at popular. Siya ay makatotohanan sa kanyang sarili. In fact, marami ang maaaring hindi mag-agree sa akin pero idideklara ko ngayon. Ang totoong pelikula, the true cinema is happening in the alternative cinema and not in your commercial movie industry. Ganyan ang magiging kontrobersyal ang libro ko na ito sa mga mahilig sa mag-isip ng malalim, no? Ang ibig natin sabihin dito ay nagpapakatotoo ang alternative cinema sa kanyang form and social purpose bilang motion pictures. Ano ang alternative cinema? Ito ang short film. Ito ang documentary, ang experimental, ang animation, ang propaganda. Ito ang regional film natin. Okay? Ito ang student film na sasabihin ko lang sa inyo. Bakit hindi natin binibilang ang student films na yan? Hindi nyo ba alam na di hamak mas marami ang nagagawang short films kesa pinagsamang pelikulang ginawa ng commercial movie industry natin? Kaya, congratulations sa lahat ng mga estudyante sa buong Pilipinas. We have our own cinema. Pero hindi ito na gather together at hindi ito na lalagay sa pampublikong kamalayan kung saan makikita natin na ito ang people's cinema, ito ang totoong pelikula ng taong bayan. Kasi bakit? Hindi mga kapitalista ang gumagawa niyan. Ikaw at ako, tingnan mo mga mukha natin. Hindi tayo artistahin, oo. Pero tayo ay nakakagawa ng pelikula natin. Tungkol saan? Tungkol sa totoong buhay natin, tungkol sa mga bangungot sa buhay natin, tungkol sa kalikasan natin na sinisira, na tungkol sa mga kasarian, tungkol sa totoong buhay natin, ekonomiya, militar at lahat na. So ito ang totoong pelikula. Ang problema lamang ay dahil sa kolonisasyon, sa komersyalismo, at dahil din sa edukasyon at public media natin, ang pelikulang ito ay masyadong nilagay sa laylayan ng ating pelikula. Sana pag natapos ko ang libro kong ito tungkol sa alternative cinema, tulad ng libro na ginawa ko sa short films nung matagal na panahon at nakatulong sa pag-usbong ng short film sa buong bansa, mapupukaw ang kamalayan ng lahat na may isang uri pa ng pelikula na siya ngayon ay nagkakaroon ng revolusyon. Sa pagbagsak ng commercial movie industry natin, tingnan mo, saan sila lahat nakakapit? Puro sa short films. Nung hindi na naituloy ang Sinimalaya, dahil nga nagka-pandemic na, o dahil may internal sila na problema, ano ang default? Ano ang default programming nila? Ano ang pinalabas nila sa taon na wala silang maipapalabas na long films? O hindi ba short films? Dahil dumating man ang digmaan, dumating man ang pandemya, dumating man ang lahat na yan, ng mga paghihirap sa lipunan, ang short films, dahil maiksi lamang ito, ang kanyang tenacity at ang kanyang resilience ay andyan palagi. So isang proyekto na dapat gawin natin ay magkaroon ng directory ng lahat ng mga short films na nagawa sa bansang ito at makikita natin na may isang uri pa ng pelikula dyan na nagagawa sa ilalim lamang ng ilong natin, labas dyan sa commercial movie industry. So having said that, Mr. Luigi, my response to you is there's no point in comparing the two. There will never be a time wherein I would like to think that the alternative cinema will ride on a new wave of indie films. Alternative cinema will have its own history, that's what I'm writing, and will have its own archive, its own everything. And mag-usap tayo ulit, Luigi. I'm happy that you're working on your dissertation.
Correct. So my key takeaway there is that we support actually the students because the students actually who create films are the new generation of voices.
That's
who
true.
actually tell the truth in motion pictures. As a journalism graduate myself, I had an experience in creating films, documentaries before. So I really appreciate the kind of work that we do. It really trained us to become, more in touch of what the social truth is and really become the voice of these truths. All right, so the next question is from Miss Andrea Peterson. At around what age or level could students start to learn about film studies? Is it necessary to study concepts of film theory before beginning to study film as an art form?
Okay, there are two questions in your question, Ms. Peterson, Andrea. The first one is the age. I have been given a grant from the Commission for Higher Education, CHED, at saka ng University of the Philippines in support of the my study of my big research that will last for 2 years, exactly on this whole idea of film education or film literacy. I cannot, it's very dangerous for me to say right now, oh, at 7 years old, they can watch animation. At 11 years old, they can watch documentary. It is very hard right now without empirical backing to say that. But let me just tell you how I began to love cinema. Alam mo, nung maliit pa kami in the 60s, nire-require kami to go to the audiovisual room, all right, at 16mm films pa ang pinapalabas niya noong una. Ang unang pelikulang napanood ko is How to Grow a Mongo Seed. Nakita nyo yan, yung maliit na munggo, tapos bigla na lang nagkakaroon siya ng sprout hanggang sa through what you call yung pixelation, 'di ba? Ang pag-shoot ng growth nitong munggo na ito, bawat araw 3 shots, next day, hanggang sa 1 linggo makita mo na lumaki yung munggo, 'di ba? That was my first encounter with film. It was a scientific film. I will never forget it because it's changed my whole life. The miracle that movies bring. So, wow. Gusto ko malaman kung anong klaseng instrumento ang gumagawa niyan. But it left a mark, just to tell you. So, masama ba na ipinalabas yun sa maliit na bata? At pinabayad pa kami ng 25. Nagbayad kami ng 25. Di wala akong recess nung araw na yon. Kasi yun lang ang pambayad ko. Pambili ko ng pineapple pie ko, pinanood ko ng sine. Di ba? Pero, look, I became richer because I was now aware of how a plant grows. And that was through cinema. And I thought that was a very good educational cinema. In fact, what I want to make pauso, because in the 80s, ako din naman ang nagpauso niyang indie cinema na yan. I mean, if only somebody can write the history of independent cinema and the role I played. Hindi sa nagmamayabang ako dahil andadyan ako at nakipaglaban. Ako ang nakipagbakbakan dyan sa SM na yan, mula Batanes hanggang Pulumulok, South Cotabato, nagpapalabas ng mga indie films na yan, samantalang hindi pa uso ang indie films. Ngayon, ang gusto kong pausuhin ay ang tinatawag na educational cinema. So, at what age, at a young age, alam naman natin siguro, let us exercise muna our judgment. Alam naman natin, we cannot show oro plata mata to elementary students. Napakabigat niyan para sa kanila. In fact, ang oras ay hindi tama. 3 oras yan. Maiksi lamang kailangan na. Dapat para sa akin, short films muna ibigay natin sa mga bata. So, let me just skip this information because I don't really have a scientific response. Then let us go to the next one. Is it necessary to study concepts of film theory before beginning to study film as an art form? The concept of film theory has concepts of film as an art form. You cannot separate the two because the concept behind an art form is supported by certain theories. And therefore, the two must go together. You may have read books called Introduction to Film, at doon makikita mo that the theory really makes you appreciate film as an art form. In my presentation earlier, I talked about the form, film as text. There was theory behind it because mainly the theory of the shot tells us that it is a text. That is a theory. It can be debunked. Somebody else who doesn't believe in it, can totally dismiss that. The belief that film can produce knowledge is a theory that I am developing right now with all the scientific studies that are being used in order to support that. So all I'm trying to tell you right now is huwag nating i-separate ang film theory sa art form dahil ang pag-aaral tungkol sa art form ay suportado ito ng mga teorya. Ang mahalaga sa tanong mo ngayon, what is important in your question, Ms. Peterson, is this, that you are, and all of us teachers, need to be open to the study of film theory. Huwag tayong matakot sa theory. Theory is there as a tool to help us. That's why I love teaching theory, because theory brings us back to the realities, testing exactly what we know about film and seeing exactly how it relates to reality. So that's what I can answer you at the moment. This is a very complex question that you've asked. We don't have much time to really delve into it, but I hope you understand. Do not bifurcate theory from form because they need to go together.
Right. So there's a part in your message that I actually captured, and I feel like we have to highlight that. You said that we start, when we are dealing with kids, when we are presenting films with kids, we have to start with short films. I agree with that because there are studies, right, that says that Generation Z kids, the Generation Z kids actually have a shorter attention span. Actually, it was compared to attention span of goldfish, which is 9 seconds. So the first 9 seconds is the crucial part. Yeah, so we have to really be careful about things
and
like
let
that.
us not torture our students. Hindi mali ang mga bata natin kung mag-aalumpihit na sila if they can become restless in our classrooms. Let us not even punish them. Film must be a joyful act. Diba? Film must be awe. Film must be magic and surprise. Diba? Huwag naman natin silang pahirapan. Kaya ito ang aking research, ang pananaliksik ngayon. Paano nga natin magagamit ang pelikula para sa iba't ibang mga age brackets natin.
Okay, so our next question is from somebody who has an interesting name that has an interesting question. She asked, the name is Crispy Garfield. And the question is, teaching film and literature, are they interconnected?
Yes, they are. All right. Although I was very emphatic kanina that film is not literature. I hope you understand where I'm coming from. Okay. I am trying to establish the autonomy, the artistic autonomy of film kasi dahil sa kasalatan, because of the deficiency of the knowledge that many of our teachers have when they teach film, they resort, as a default knowledge they have, they resort to literature. So that they teach film as a literature, focusing only on story element. E nakita nyo naman sa aking diagram kanina, film is not just story. It is one of the 8 elements. Meron pang 7 na nagkukwento sa inyo. If you are in the presence of really a great director like Lino Broca, like Eddie Romero, like Mike De Leon, their films are speaking to you visually, orally. Kahit hindi mo nakikita, inunal sa tubig of Ishmael Bernal, you know what modernism is and the danger of modernism. Even if you don't see it, in the water, the polluted water, you know exactly that modernism is bad because of the cinematographic presentation that's being shown. So having said that, I just wanted to separate the two. But your question is this: teaching film and literature, are they interconnected? Yes, they can be. In fact, we have one course in UP which says cinema and the other arts, and the favorite art that is being connected with film is literature. Let me just go to Philippine history very quickly. Do you know that the first film that was made was a theater literature? Okay, Dalagang Bukid was really the script. First of all, it was a popular theater presentation, and the script of that was later adapted to film by Jose Nepomuceno. And let us look exactly at what happened after that. Many of the films that were made, because wala pa naman tayong mga kasing galing ni Ricky Lee may mga specialized scriptwriters tayo, hinango ang marami sa mga material sa pelikula mula sa novels at short stories. At pagdating ng 1950s, may libro si Ariola published by UST nga bale tungkol sa comics at pelikula. Darna, Bonjing, Palaris. These were all popular comics materials. They are literature, di ba? Don't tell me they are inferior literary pieces. They were not. They were popular literature. Pero ginamit sila na kwento para sa pelikula. So merong interconnectedness ang literatura at pelikula. And let us not forget the great classics that we have. Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo were all made by some of our great national artists. Jerry De Leon is one of them. Eddie Romero is one of them. Lino Broca would have wanted to make his own version of Noli Me Tangere and El Filibusterismo. Walang kamatayan yung classics natin na nire-recycle yan over and over again dahil nga sa interconnectedness ng literatura at ng pelikula. Pero, having said that, samantalang mahalaga ang interconnection between film and literature, let us really see that film has its own autonomous properties that make film film and make literature literature. Ang isa ay gumagamit ng mga kataga, words are being used to tell a story, whereas the other one, which is film, uses images to tell a story.
Okay, our next question is from Mr. Ron Evangelista. Hello, Professor Nick. From a movement perspective, can we consider the emergence of Broca, Bernal, and the others as our new wave period of cinema? Thank you.
The immediate answer is yes. If you go to the book Urian, the first volume, which was 1970-1971, they were really called the New Wave. Yun naman ang unang tawag dito eh. Dahil alam mo, asiwa ako dyan sa tawag na ang panahon ni na Broca ay second golden age. Tulad ng sinabi ng kaibigan ko si Teddy ko, all right? I mean, I respect that to a certain point, but if we go contemporaneous, really to the time when they were being born, the critics who were also being born at that time, yung manunuri ng pelikulang Filipino, gave them the right term, which was similar to the terms used in France, in Poland, in Japan, in Germany, in so many other places. The New Wave phenomenon was really international. And so it was with the Philippines. We were just a bit late because we were in the mid-70s when that New Wave really happened. Whereas it started in Paris in 1968, what is called as the Nouvelle Vague, the New Wave. All right? So the New Wave was an international phenomenon. But ewan ko ba, bakit nagsistick yung salitang golden age na yan? So in short, kung yun lang naman ang tanong, dahil this is a yes or no question, I'll immediately answer you with yes. They are actually called the New Wave.
Clear. Okay, the next question is from Ms. Maria Sol Sumigin. Is it okay to introduce films that attack the government to students as references?
This is a very good, this is a very controversial point, Ms. Sumigin. Okay? I wish we can really make a conversation because I don't see you, but perhaps you can later on email Vibal, which can be forwarded to me, because this is a delicate topic. That's correct. Para saan ba ang pelikula? May tanong natin. Ang tanong mo kasi is it possible? Kasi alam ko ang takot natin ng mga guro, Ma'am Maria Sol Sumigin. Takot din tayo na samantalang nagpapalabas tayo ng mga radikal siguro na pelikula, tayo ay mapipiligro. Unang-una, merong patakaran ang DepEd. Alam niyo po, with much understanding, naintindihan ko po, lalo pa sa secondary and primary classes, huwag niyo kalabanin at this point. Kung mapipiligro din lang naman kayo, hindi rin tama, no? Na talagang magre-rebelde kayo at magra-radical kayo at magsasalungat, no, sa pagpalagay natin ay sa ating mga authorities. Naintindihan ko po kayo. Pero kung ang batayan nyo kanina ay ang aking medyo matapang na mga pananalita tungkol dun sa Burlesque Queen o di kaya sa revolusyon, yun po ay, dahil hindi ko po kayo kilala at this point, kayong mga nanonood sa akin, hindi ko po alam kung kayo ay mga tertiary, secondary, or primary. So I took the liberty na dito sa University of the Philippines, alam nyo naman po yan, may freedom ho kami, no? May tinatawag na academic freedom. May kalayaan kami na magsalita ng nasa isipan namin, sa kamalayan namin. Kami ang naghuhulma ng mga kamalayan na nagpupukaw sa mga estudyante namin tungkol sa mga realidad sa ating lipunan. So I was speaking in that context. Pero Ma'am Sumigin, hindi ko po magagawa yan sa isang Catholic school na isang first year high school. Maniwala po kayo, I don't think I can say with such conviction. Alam ko po, pag nakikita ko ang aking audience, ako po ay napaka-malleable, madaling mag-adjust. Nag-a-adjust ko po ang aking lektura pag ang aking kaharap ay grade 6 students. And believe me po, 20 taon, mula, sabi ko kanina, mula Baguio hanggang Pulumulok, South Cotabato, dumaan sa Capiz, dumaan sa Bohol, sa Gimbal, Iloilo, dumaan sa Negros, dumaan sa Catanduanes, dumaan sa Dagupan, dumaan sa Davao, Cagayan de Oro. Iba't ibang uri ng estudyante ang nakaharap ko. Hindi ko pwedeng i-insiste ang experimental film na may mga imaheng nakahubad sa first year high school student sa isang Catholic school. Alam ko naman po kung anong ipoprogram ko. So, sasagutin ko lamang po ang tanong ninyo dahil matapang ito na katanungan at I am being put into a position wherein I need to clarify myself. Tama ba to introduce films that attack the government to students as references? Attack the government is very strong. I don't think I really talked about that. I did not say attack the government, but rather we have films that are critical of. Iba ang critical kaysa sa attack. So siguro dahil sa narinig mo na sa sinabi ko nga bali na I know how to adjust what films to be shown to the different audiences out there. I also know how to tone down, how to divert, how to change the lessons that I'm going to teach depending on the sensibility. Dahil sa huli po, and I'll end this by saying in my answer to you, sa huli ho, napakahalaga ng sensitivity. Huwag lang tayong sarili natin ang iniisip nito at ang galing-galing natin na teacher. Hindi ho yun. Hindi tayo nagpapa-impress pag nagtuturo tayo ng pelikula. Yung narinig nyo lamang kanina ay, sabi ko, hindi ko kayo nakikita, hindi ko alam kung ano ang level ninyo. Baka ang pakiramdam ko sa iyo, Miss Sumigin, ikaw ay nagtuturo ng siguro ay senior high school, pagpalagay natin. Pero maintindihan mo sana, dito kami sa UP ay ganun po ka-passionate kami kung magturo, ganun ako ka-passionate magturo paggamit ng pelikula na ipapakita ko na ang pelikula ay pwede nating magamit to be critical, no? To be honest with the social realities in our society. But I know how to tone that down in deference and in respect for the young audiences that we have out there. And attacking the government is not really very productive. But being critical, I think trabaho natin sa media yan. Being critical. Now, to attack is something else. Perhaps we attack when we are in the streets. But in cinema, I think being critical is more productive.
Yeah, I agree with you. I think she was just not able to find the right words to put the message. But yeah,
but I understand
the phrase "attack the" correct. I think the phrase "attack the government" is quite strong. It's actually a whole lot strong. Yeah. So Correct. And I think I agree with you, sir, that to be critical, probably, especially if it really represents the truth, is progressive. To attack is divisive. I think to attack.
Wow, you said it. You said it, Paul.
Right.
You said it better than me.
Okay, so for the next question we actually have a lot of questions lined up.
My God, dumadami ng dumadami. Oh.
Yeah, so I think we have to cut because we don't have plenty of time.
I'll be quick with my answers. Akala ko kanina kaunti lang ngayon biglang dumami.
Yeah.
But so maybe you can give them, or I can give them my email address so they can just forward it to me.
All right, so at the end of the program, Sir Nick will leave his email address to us. But for now, we have a question from one of my colleagues, Miss Mary Rose Magkamit. Hello po, Sir Nick. Why is it still important to study Philippine cinema, especially now when there is an undeniable censorship, when artists deviating against the socio-political status quo are being targeted? Another interesting and somehow controversial question.
Yeah, so here we go. All right. The more we need to study about Philippine
They really
cinema,
took advantage of this opportunity, Prof. Nick.
The more that we need to study, the more it is important to study Philippine cinema and its role in our society. I don't know if many of you have visited the site of the Ang Docu. All right, it went on for almost a month, wherein doon natin nakita ang maraming mga pelikula, hindi ito mga commercial movies natin, di ba? Kung saan talagang diretsahan, makatotohanan ang pagdepict ng ating lipunan. So, lumaki ako sa panahon ng diktadurya. In fact, umusbong ako bilang filmmaker nung panahon ng diktadurya. Pagbalik ko galing sa Paris, sa pag-aaral ko sa Paris, France, pag-uwi ko dito, talagang daluyong ang aking naharap. Bumalik ako ng 1982. By 1983, binaril si Ninoy. 1983, gumawa na ako ng sarili kong pelikula. Alright? At talagang I went into the eye of the storm, so to speak. So you're talking about dictatorship. You're talking about military repression. I made my films during those times. I came out as a veteran. And that's why I can speak this way. Because I have faced the very troubled times. And now, of course, marami ang sasabi na balik na naman tayo dito sa censorship natin. Film censorship, maaring hindi na masyado. Dahil nang nabuwag na ang diktadurya, isa ako sa umupo sa MTRCB, alright, kasama si Armida Sion Reyna, para buwagin ang mga batas tungkol sa censorship na itinayo ng panahon ng diktadurya. Dahil nakapaglaban kami sa diktadurya, kami ang inatasan naman ngayon na baklasin ang mga ito. So hopefully, nakatulong yun. So ngayon, meron na tayong classification. So wala na masyadong angas tayong naririnig about film censorship. Pero may censorship sa social media natin. May censorship sa ibang uri pa ng mga media natin. At of course, pag lumampas ng bagsak na kasi ang movie industry natin, kaya the commercial movie industry, kaya wala namang masyado talagang, yung tapang natin hindi na doon. Ang matapang na pelikula ngayon ay mga dictatorship, ang mga documentaries, at ang mga social media natin. And I agree with you. Anda dyan nakaabang ang mga militar, may red tagging. Taga-UP ako, ang red tagging, anda dyan pa rin sa amin. Ano ba? I mean, bakit may red tagging? Hindi naman kami, Diyos ko, mali na ba pag kami ay maging critical sa gobyerno? But let us not indulge so much in this. Baka mamaya ma-red tagging pa tayo dito ng todo. So, para sa akin lang, hindi dapat tayo matakot o mayanig dahil sa huli, ang lipunan ay may karapatan tayo bilang mga media people, bilang mga filmmakers. Ang karapatan natin ay katulad din ng karapatan ng militar at ng iba pang mga uri ng tao. We are here para sa malayang pagpapahayag, and anything that will curtail it, we need to be very critical about that. And tayo ang boses at mata ng ating lipunan. So I think we are just doing what we could. At dito makikita ang ating courage, ang ating tapang, in the same way as I said, nung panahon ng diktadurya, doon na-define ang aming katapangan. Ako ay nasa documentary, si Nalino Broca ay nasa commercial big movies. No? My point nga, Bali, is that in the end, dalawa sila ay puro mahalaga. Dahil ako, na-capture ko talaga ang EDSA Revolution, ang Mendiola Massacre, ang lahat na yan. So yun, wala man malaking artista sa pelikula ko, sa huli ay mahalaga rin ang pelikula ko dahil yun ang totoong mukha ng taong bayan. Alright, we're going to the pahuli na. How could we discern the right film? Yun ba?
I was muted. Okay, so the next question is from Miss Jello. Actually, she's one of my colleagues also, Miss Jello Lopez. Does the hyper commercialization of movies, example given, those which only hype up a love team, the shallow, nonsensical movies, quote unquote, really pull down the quality of Filipino film? What can we do about this?
Okay, alam mo medyo medyo nagmelo na ako, no? May respeto na ako sa tinatawag na movie industry. Alam mo kung bakit? Naging industry ang movie industry dahil ilang pamilya ang pinapakain yon. Nung una, ng pa-art lang talaga ako, kababalik ko lang galing Paris, kababalik ko lang galing New York. Of course, ang taas ng noo ko at puro art, puro sining lang iniisip ko. Then I came face to face with what is called as the political economy, no? Political economy. Ibig sabihin, tinitingnan niya ang uri ng ekonomiya sa paggagawa ng mga pelikula. Nalaman ko dahil nagtrabaho ako sa MOWEL Fund, Movie Workers Welfare Foundation, kung saan ang mga kasapi nito ay mga manggagawa ng pelikulang Pilipino. Alam nyo ba na ginagatasan ng gobyerno natin ang pelikula pero hindi recognized ang mga manggagawa ng pelikula as professionals? Wala silang health services. Wala silang insurance. Wala silang hospitalization. Industry tayo ng industry sa movie industry. Hindi naman industry ang tingin ng gobyerno. Ginagatasan lang nila ng pera ng napakalaki mula sa MMFF at lahat na milyones ang kinukuha ng gobyerno. Itinayo ni Erap Estrada, problematic nga, of course, no? Pero may ginawa si Joseph Estrada, nagtayo ng foundation na nagbigay ng hospitalization sa mga yan. So, in the end, nang makita ko ang paghihirap ng talaga movie industry, unti-unti naintindihan ko na kung anong uri ng Philippine movie industry ang meron tayo. Unang-una, nagbibigay ito ng trabaho. Dahil kaunti lamang ang kapitalista na producer at wala ang puso nila sa mga manggagawa, gagawa sila ng mga pelikulang exploitative nga. Ang sabi mo nga ay hyper-commercialization. Matinding salita yan. Pero totoo yan. At ngayon, tinatangkilik naman ng taong bayan. So who are we to say na talagang mali ang taong bayan dahil tinangkilik niya ang pinagtatawanan na bakla, for example? Dahil talagang kumikita ang pelikula tungkol sa bakla na hindi naman tama ang representasyon. May isang pelikula dyan, lumalabas pa rin na 21st century na tayo, ang bakla ay isang sumpa. Diyos ko naman, please, maawa ka, hindi kami sumpa. Yan ang mga gusto kong baliktarin ng mga maling kamalayan. Pero tinangkilik ito ng milyon-milyon. Kumita ng limpak-limpak ang mga producers na may mga ganyang uring hyper-commercialization. So ang sabi dito ay, nakaka-pull down ba ito ng quality ng Filipino movies? I'll say yes to that. Pero ito na nga balik, kaya nga dapat we need to become more proactive sa paggawa ng mga pelikula. Sa isang pelikulang ginagawa sa hyper-commercialization environment na ito, ilang indie films, ilang documentaries ang hindi nagsusubscribe doon sa over-commercialization na yon. Tangkilikin din natin sila. What can we do about it? Yan ang sinasabi ko. Manood naman tayo ng mga pelikula na medyo makatotohanan. Naku, ang uso na naman ngayon, boys love. Naku, boys love na naman. Ini-exploit na naman yung topic na yan. Pero wala tayong magagawa din dahil at this point, tinatangkilik naman ng may mga manunood eh. So magaling sila sa promotions. So ang aking misyon na ngayon sa buhay ay para masagot ko itong what can we do about it, film education, film education, film education. Kaya hindi nyo na ako masyadong nakikitang gumagawa ng pelikula. Sa huling yugto ng aking buhay na ito, alam ko ang laban ko. Ang laban ko ay edukasyon sa pelikula. Yan ang aking rallying cry. I have spent so much of my life in cinema to know already what are the faults. Ma'am Jello Lopez, ang tanong mo, ang aking iisipin sa aking pagtulog ngayong gabi. I am touched by this very emotionally because you are taking us to task. I am emotional because this is the question that we need to answer. Hindi lang ng filmmakers po. Kung ikaw ay guru din, Ma'am Jello. Kung ikaw ay guru rin, at ina-address ko emotionally ang lahat ng mga kapwa ko teachers diyan. Ano ang ginagawa niyo? Ano ang pelikulang ginagamit niyo? Yan na ang apoy na umaalab sa puso ko ngayon na dapat gawin. Kasi UP kami, meron kaming slogan, kung hindi tayo, sino? Kung hindi ngayon, kailan? Impatient na kami. Dapat may magawa tayo. Yan ang dugong UP, kamalayang UP na dapat may magawa tayo. At yun ang pumupukaw sa akin ngayon. At sana ang sagot ko dito ngayon, Ma'am Jello, ay hindi tapos dito. Sa aking mga pagsusulat, sa aking mga pagtuturo at sa mga pelikulang gagawin ko, ito po ang sagot na talagang nag-aapoy sa aking dibdib. What can we do about this? Thank you, Ma'am Jello.
All right, so the next question is, I think it's an objective question, but I think, okay, so let me just read the question. It's from Mr. Sigrid Mejia. The question is, how could we discern the right film for our students? I think he was asking for some fundamental considerations probably.
Yes. To make it simple lang, although once again, ito po ang topic, ito po ang concern na ginagawa ko sa aking research na binigyan ako ng pera ng CHED at ng anong tawag mo nito, ng UP para masagot ang mga tanong na ito. Okay, anong uri ng mga pelikula ang ipapalabas natin sa iba't ibang mga grade levels, iba-ibang mga school levels. Pero just to immediately respond to you, I think we can start with a story. Mr. Siegfried Mejia, tingnan niyo muna kung ito ay kwento na payak, kung kaya ito ay pwedeng maipalabas para sa mga bata. Elementary, for example. Ang high school natin ay pwede na natin silang mabigyan ng mga history films like I think Jose Rizal, pwede na natin silang mapapanood, pelikulang Ang Pangulo o di kaya kay Bonifacio o di kaya pwede ng General Luna. Pero I doubt whether General Luna ipalabas natin sa mga grade school. Wag muna po, okay? Medyo mabigat yan para sa mga bata. Ang isa pa mahaba. Short films will be the best to be shown. Kaya isa sa trabahong ginagawa ko ngayon ay ang pagkalap ng mga short films na pwedeng magagamit sa ating elementary grades. Alright? Doon ay talagang bubusugin namin kayo ng lahat na pelikulang pwedeng magawa, mapalabas para sa mga grade school natin sa K-12. Alright? Number 2, yung mga medyo mataas na antas na senior high school at tertiary, ito na po yung medyo mga mabigat na pelikula natin, mga critical na pelikula sa lipunan natin, kaya na nilang pag-usapan yan, at di kaya mga experimental films, pwede na po. So at this point, I cannot prescribe to you na grade school, ito yon. Okay? And siguro po, Mr. Siegfried, antayin nyo na lang. Baka in a year or two, lalabas na rin po ito. Magkakaroon tayo for the first time. Sana with Vibal Publishing. Itong hinihingi, just calling out to Vibal ha, kitang-kita nyo sa mga tanong ha, nagtatanong na sila ng reference books na pwedeng magamit. Watch out, publishers. I hope Vibal will pick this up because I'm willing to write about this na may interest na. So, nagtuturo tayo ng pelikula pero saan ang mga gabay natin? sayang lang at hindi ko makuha ang aking libro. Meron po ako sa National Bookstore na libro. Ang tawag doon ay Sinigabay. Ito po ay paggabay sa inyo lahat. Paul, pwedeng magsalita ka muna. Kunin ko lang na napakabilis. In 1 minute, less.
Sure. Sige, sir. Okay, so Sir Prof. Nick Deocampo is currently getting the book that he was referring to earlier. So he could explain further what he's trying to talk about.
Okay, ito po ang libro ko, 100 lesson plans. 100 lesson plans mula sa Himala hanggang sa bayan ko, kapit sa patalim, animation, documentary, short films. Andi dito po, 100 lesson plans available sa National Bookstore. Sayang hindi ito published by Vibal, pero yung karibal nila, which is Anvil, nanalo po ito ng National Book Award. May mga teacher at principal na pag pumunta ako sa kanila at nagtuturo ng film, hinahalikan nila ako. Hinahalikan nila ako kasi sabi nila, naku Sir Nick, talagang ang galing-galing naman kasi may 100 lesson plans na ready na sila. Hindi na sila dapat gagawa ng lesson plan. Andi dito po. At dito, nakarekomenda po kung pang elementary, pang high school, o pang college. Nandito na po ang lesson, ang guide questions mula synopsis hanggang sa kung saang klase siya pwede ma-recommenda, etc. So anyway, just in case you may be able to chance this book online or sa National Bookstore, may libro na po. Ito ang kauna-unahang libro on film literacy sa bansa. Kaya nakakapagsalita ako tungkol sa film literacy dahil nanggaling na po ito sa libro. All right, patapos na tayo. I know.
Okay, yeah. I guess we need to go to the last question, sir.
Yes.
We have one here. Apologies for those questions that we will not be able to entertain, but we tried our best, but we have limited time. So the last question is, we don't have a name. So the question is, how do you educate people that have greater freedoms or access to use resources for digital mass media and alternative cinema to express levels of responsible use of media resources to avoid abuses or even biases and dogmas that are dangerous? From John Paul Tanchanko.
Can you repeat that? It's a long question, but you seem to have compressed it. Just give me the question again, a more compressed question, and we can end it here. What?
I think that what he's trying to ask is that how do we educate people that basically have access to resources for digital mass media and alternative cinema to
I get it.
To be responsible in consuming media resources to avoid abuses or even biases and dogmas that are dangerous. I think that's basically
Mr. Tanchanko, this is a brilliant question. I was trying to read your entire question. It's a very profound question. It cannot be answered immediately, but what I'm so happy about, Mr. Tanchanko, in your question is that you give premium to education. Your question is, how do you educate people that have greater freedoms? Tayo yon. Sa malayang lipunan, or we think may malayang lipunan tayo, pero ang nangyayari ay ini-express natin ang ating na dapat ang access natin to digital media and to this freedom nga bali. Pwede ba nating magamit ito for the responsible use of media resources? Napakahalaga ng tanong na ito. All right? Kaya po, I'll answer this very personally, Mr. Tanchanko. Kahit alam ko na nag-iisa lang at this point, singular ang response ko sa tanong na ito. I could be making my name out there as the greatest film director, God knows. But I had ambitions also to make film after film after film. Sino bang ayaw na manalo sa Cannes, Berlin, Venice? Sadly ba yan? I'm in those festivals as a member of the film jury. Ewan ko ba bakit nasa jury ako palagi. Hindi naman ako nasa film na gusto ko sana, pelikula ko sana yung hinuhusgahan dyan at manalo naman. Sino bang ayaw niyaan, hindi ba? Pero nasaan nyo ako nakikita? Sa pagtuturo. I have enough contacts in the world to get my films in these international festivals. I have enough contacts in terms of producers. It used to be in the 80s, I was in London, I was in Tokyo, I was in New York, I was almost everywhere, Amsterdam, talking to producers. That's why I could produce a lot of films. There are times wherein I ask myself, anong nangyari, Nick? Bakit ka tumigil? Ando doon ka na eh. Because I see that, para saan ba ito? Mananalo ako ng award at ilang awards ang pinanalunan ko. Nabago ba ang kalagayan ng lipunan? Ito yung tinatanong mo eh. I was in that privileged position. Ito yung tinutumbok niyo, Mr. Tanchanco. And anyway, ending na natin ito, so indulge me a little bit. Ilan pa sa atin na mga filmmakers are in that privileged position right now? Ang iba sa kanila ay ayaw nang matuto pa. Kung saan naman ang nakikita ko ay ang aking larangan ngayon ay edukasyon. And I'm trying to be as good as I can to be a very good teacher, because if I have students of 10 or 20 or tulad nito, God knows kung ilang daan kayo ang nadadya nakikinig sa akin. Pero doon sa daang docu ko, there were 17,000 all the way to Mindanao listening to me. I'd rather spend my life right now in terms of education. And that's why I want to write books. The grant that I got, which is substantial, big, is for the creation of a pedagogy on cinema. Because I want to answer your question and let everybody hear this question by Mr. Tanchanco. How do you educate people that have greater freedoms or access to use resources for digital mass media and alternative cinema to express levels of responsible use of media resources? Ang hinihingi ni Mr. Tanchanco, can we be more responsible? Huwag naman nating abusuhin ang ating access at ang ating kalayaan sa media, sa mga exploitative, commercial, and abusive use of our talent and our resources. Sino ang talo dyan? Ang taong bayan ulit. Lalo pa ito pa. Itong mga filmmakers na ito, ipaparequire pa nila yan sa ating mga teachers. Uy, panoorin nyo, suportahan nyo. They are now inventing ways that they can monetize the social media in order for our students again to be their market. Samantalang mga pelikula nila ay mga fantasy nila about, God knows kung ano yung mga fantasy nila na yan at sabihin nila art. So I will end this discussion by saying, in the end, it is the quality of education that we need to give, not only to our students inside our classrooms, but to the general public. That's why, much as I'm teaching in UP, I go out of my way to talk to as many audiences as possible, and made possible right now by the internet. Wow, I can now reach thousands of people to listen, because in the end, my solution to many of the questions that you have raised here is education. I end this by talking about the new philosophy that I am developing in Philippine cinema, because this cinema needs philosophy. Developing the new art of Philippine cinema takes philosophy. What is that kind of cinema that we are going to talk about? And this can only be derived through education. So I am more interested in books, in the production of knowledge, in the use of cinema. For what? For art? Art is only a small segment in the big concern that I have right now. I am now trying to devise what is called educational cinema, pedagogical cinema, cinema that is not only about film aesthetics. It is a cinema that is about economics, disaster risk management, about gender equality, about spirituality, about the social sciences. So all of this can be served by cinema if we try to really innovate it. We have been, we have been so dominated by Hollywood over the past 100 years. As we face the 21st century, we need to take control of cinema, and cinema is not just for commercialization and for art. It has been hijacked for so long by all of these art issues. I have nothing against that. I am teaching film as art. However, all I'm saying now is film can also serve other academic disciplines, and we need to put that into place. So with that, I thank you all so much. I'm sorry, sometimes I can be very strong in what I say because I believe strongly in what I do, and I do what I say, and I say what I do. So I thank Vibal, Paul, Baloha, I thank you so much, and your entire team. I cannot see the audience out there, but I know you are there, and I hope one day we can all meet up with each other, and let us push cinema to gain more territories and to become more useful and beneficial to our society.
Thank you very much, Professor Nick, for spending this afternoon, this evening with us. All right. We certainly learned a lot, and it's such a huge honor for me to have met you, sir, and to have a public discussion with you. It's just unfortunate that we are not able to shake hands. But I will meet you. I will meet you in the future, sir. Hopefully soon. I respect you big time, and I'll see you around maybe. All right. So thank you to those who left their questions also for the speaker.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye-bye. I'd like to read all of these messages. If you can send them to me. All right. Thank you.
Sure, sir. After,
Do I leave now?
No, sir. Just turn off the camera. That's okay.
Okay. I just turn off? All right. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Okay. Thanks. Okay. We have reached the end of our virtual event. For those who would like to get a copy of this book, Philippine Cinema, 1897-2000 or to 2020, you may pre-order online at shop.vivalgroup.com. We will leave the details at the caption of this FB Live event. Please check out. For more updates, please like and follow Vibal Group on Facebook and, of course, Twitter and Instagram. You may also visit our official website at www.vibalgroup.com. Now, on behalf of everyone in the Vibal Foundation team, I would like to once again address our deepest thanks to Professor Nick Deocampo for gracing this virtual book launch with his presence. Of course, we'd also like to thank the people behind this landmark project. I would just like to greet Doña Georgina Zobel Padilla, who I think is with us watching this virtual launch. I hope she stayed with us throughout the entire session. Hello, Madam. I hope you enjoyed watching the event. Okay, just a reminder, we have a teaching guide, a set of teaching guides that we will publish on the FB Live event page. All right, so for those who click going, you guys will be able to receive these teaching guides because we will post it on the FB Live event page. Again, this is Paul. Thank you everyone for watching this afternoon. I had so much fun, even though I cannot see you all right? We hope for your continued support for the fine Philippine books for the mind and the eye. Good evening.